In May of the year 633 AD, on a sun-scorched plain near the Euphrates, an imperial army walked into a battlefield it believed was already won. 30,000 Persian troops, heavy infantry, armored cavalry, veterans of centuries of imperial warfare. Facing them stood barely 15,000 Arabs, no walls, no fortifications, no reinforcements, no retreat. By sunset, the Persian army would be annihilated, not defeated, not routed, but erased as a fighting force, in a single day, by one commander, by one decision. This was the moment the Persian Empire began to die. And by the end of this story, you will understand how Khalid ibn al-Walid crushed one of the most powerful military systems on earth using a single, ruthless, strategic idea. Why the Persians never saw it coming, why they believed victory was guaranteed, and why what happened on that plain permanently shattered their confidence in war. But here's what most people miss. This was not about numbers. It was not about faith alone. And it was not about brute strength. It was about forcing an empire to move exactly where you want it to move. And then sealing the exit behind it. How did a force half the size destroy a professional imperial army trained for centuries? Why did Persian commanders, men who had defeated Romans and crushed rebellions, advance with absolute confidence? What mistake did they repeat, even after watching Arab armies win again and again? And why did Khalid deliberately allow his own line to be pushed backward, surrendering ground on purpose? The answer lies in a strategy so controlled, so precise, that by the time the Persians realized what was happening, escape was already impossible. But to understand it, we must step back, before the slaughter, before the trap closed, back to the moment the Persian Empire believed this war would be easy. In 633 AD, the Sassanid Persian Empire was one of the great powers of the world. It had ruled Mesopotamia for more than 4 centuries. It had fought Rome and Byzantium as an equal. Its armies were professional, hierarchical, and battle-hardened. Persian warfare was built on certainty. Certainty in armor, certainty in formations, certainty in discipline. At the heart of their armies stood heavy infantry, locked shield to shield, encased in mail and lamellar armor. Behind them rode the Savaran cavalry, noble horsemen trained from childhood, armed with lances and bows, mounted on the finest horses imperial wealth could provide. They did not skirmish. They advanced, they crushed. So when reports reached Ctesiphon that Arab armies had crossed into Iraq, Persian commanders did not panic. They were offended. To them, this was not an invasion. It was a nuisance. A tribal force from the desert had no right standing on imperial soil, so they gathered an army, and they marched to destroy it. Across the plain waited Khalid ibn al-Walid, former enemy of Islam, veteran of countless battles, a commander whose men trusted him not because he promised survival, but because he promised clarity. Khalid understood something the Persians did not. This war would not be won by matching strength with strength. If he stood still, he would be crushed. If he charged blindly, he would be enveloped. So he chose a battlefield that looked ordinary and hid a decision inside it. The plain near Walaja stretched wide and open. Flat ground dominated the center, with low ridges running along both flanks. The heat punished men in heavy armor. The terrain looked perfect for a conventional imperial advance. To the Persians, it was ideal. Room to deploy, space to advance, no obstacles. But Khalid saw something else. Those low ridges were not scenery, they were curtains. And behind them, unseen from the Persian center, Khalid concealed his most dangerous asset, cavalry. 2 mounted forces, removed from the main line, ordered to remain still, silent, invisible. This was not improvisation. This was design. The Persian commander formed his army exactly as doctrine demanded. Heavy infantry in the center, cavalry deployed on the wings, archers positioned to weaken the enemy before contact. The plan was simple. Advance. Fix the Arab center in place. Break it with pressure. Arab armies had already shown themselves dangerous, but only when allowed freedom of movement. So the Persians intended to pin Khalid's force, crush the center, and roll the line inward. They had more men, more armor, more endurance. As the two armies faced each other beneath the rising sun, everything about the field told the Persians they were about to win. The battle began without chaos. Persian infantry advanced in disciplined blocks. Arab lines met them head-on. Steel struck steel. Shields locked. Men fell. Then something unexpected happened. Khalid's center began to give ground. Not a collapse. Not a rout. A controlled withdrawal. Step by step. Yard by yard. To the Persian commander, this confirmed everything he believed. The Arabs were breaking. Pressure increased. More infantry pushed forward. The Persian line surged with confidence, convinced they were winning exactly as imperial doctrine promised. What they did not realize, what they could not see, was that every step forward drew them deeper into ground Khalid had already measured. This was not retreat. It was invitation. Khalid rode behind his line, watching, not fighting, watching. He did not respond emotionally to losses. He did not rush reserves forward. He allowed the Persians to believe they were forcing the battle on their terms, and the Persians believed it. They pressed harder. Their infantry surged forward, stretching their formation. Their cavalry drifted outward, seeking room to maneuver. With every passing minute, the Persian line grew longer, thinner, more confident. This was the moment Khalid was waiting for, but he would not strike yet. Not until the door was completely closed. The Persian commander believed he was winning. From his position behind the center, everything looked correct. The Arab line was bending. Ground was being taken. The enemy was being pushed exactly where doctrine said they should break. This was how imperial wars were supposed to end. Press, fix, destroy. So he committed more men. Additional infantry units were fed into the center, thickening the push. Persian shields locked tighter. The advance became heavier, slower, more relentless. Each step forward felt like progress carved in stone. What he did not notice was the cost. The Persian line was no longer compact. It was stretched. The center surged forward faster than the wings. Gaps formed between infantry blocks. Orders took longer to travel. Horns and shouted commands blurred in the heat and dust. Still, confidence grew. Because Khalid ibn al-Walid continued to give ground. To the Persians, this looked like exhaustion. To Khalid, it was geometry. Here's what most people miss. Khalid was not reacting to the Persian advance. He was measuring it. Every backward step was calculated. Every fallen man was accounted for. He was allowing the Persians to occupy space that weakened them, and they walked into it willingly. As the fighting dragged on, the Persian cavalry began to drift wider. They were trained to exploit breakthroughs, to strike flanks once the enemy collapsed. But there was no collapse yet, only resistance that refused to break. So they waited and waited. This delay mattered, because cavalry that waits loses momentum. Cavalry that drifts loses cohesion. Khalid saw this too. The Arab infantry in the center continued their controlled withdrawal, absorbing blows, bleeding, but never shattering. Men fell, lines thinned, yet discipline held. This was suffering by design. Khalid understood something fundamental about imperial armies. They hate uncertainty. They crave finality. And the longer the Persians pushed without a decisive break, the more aggressive they became. By midday, the Persian commander made a critical decision. He ordered the center to press harder, not to hold, not to consolidate, but to finish it. This was the mistake Khalid had engineered. The Persian infantry surged again, stepping past their original alignment, driving deeper into the plain. Their formation lengthened further. The wings struggled to keep pace. Behind those wings, hidden beyond the low ridges, the Arab cavalry waited. Silent, motionless, invisible. They had been waiting for hours. Dust coated their armor. Horses shifted nervously. Men kept their reins tight and their voices low. They were under strict orders. Do not move. Do not reveal yourselves. Do not act until the signal. Khalid rode to a position where he could see everything. The Persian center, the stretched wings, the exposed rear. This is where everything begins to tighten. Because the Persians had advanced so far that retreat was no longer simple. Behind them stood their own reserves, supply trains, and marching columns. Ahead of them stood an enemy that refused to collapse. On both sides, ground they assumed was empty. Khalid allowed the battle to grind on just a little longer. Every minute increased Persian fatigue. Every minute deepened their commitment. And then the moment arrived. Not announced, not dramatic, just inevitable. Khalid raised his arm. The signal was given. From behind the ridges, the Arab cavalry moved, first at a trot, then at a gallop. Two mounted forces, hidden for most of the day, suddenly appeared on both Persian flanks. This is the moment the Persian army stopped being an army. The cavalry did not charge the infantry head-on. They did not waste momentum. They went for the rear, for the unprotected backs of the Persian wings, for the space the Persians believed was safe. Horses thundered downhill, lances lowered, dust exploded into the air. The Persian cavalry reacted too late. They were already stretched, already misaligned, already committed forward. When they turned to respond, they found themselves attacked from angles they had not prepared for. This is where discipline collapses, because infantry formations rely on certainty, knowing where the threat is. Suddenly, threats came from behind. Persian infantry turned in confusion. Units tried to pivot. Commands contradicted each other. Shields faced the wrong direction. And Khalid struck the final blow. He ordered the Arab center to stop retreating, then to advance. What had looked like exhaustion became aggression. The Arab infantry surged forward at the exact moment the Persian rear was attacked. The Persians were now compressed from three sides: front, rear, flanks. This was not a battle anymore. It was containment. Men dropped their shields to turn. Others were trampled. Cavalry crashed into infantry that could not properly defend itself. Panic spread faster than orders. Persian officers tried to restore control. They failed, because control requires space, and Khalid had taken it away. This is the moment history turns. Within minutes, Persian cohesion dissolved. Units broke apart. Retreat paths clogged. Men were cut down trying to escape through gaps that no longer existed. The plain that had looked so open in the morning became a killing ground. Dust choked the air. Screams replaced commands. Armor became a liability under the sun. And still, the Arab cavalry did not stop. They pressed inward, tightening the circle. What had begun as a confident imperial advance had become a trap with no exit. The Persians fought bravely, but bravery does not matter when movement is impossible. By late afternoon, organized resistance ended. Thousands lay dead. Thousands more fled, abandoning equipment, banners, and wounded comrades. The Persian army that had marched out with certainty was shattered. And Khalid ibn al-Walid did not pursue recklessly. He watched. Because he understood what had really been destroyed was not just an army, but an idea. The idea that Persian formations were invincible. The idea that imperial doctrine guaranteed victory. The idea that desert armies could be pushed and broken at will. As the sun lowered over Walaja, the battlefield fell silent. The Persians had not been outfought. They had been outmoved, and the empire would never forget it. The battlefield fell quiet faster than anyone expected, not because the fighting had been clean, but because there was no one left to fight. Bodies covered the plain near Walaja. Persian banners lay trampled in the dust. Armor that had once symbolized imperial certainty now weighed down the dead beneath the sun. This had not been a narrow defeat. It was destruction. Thousands of Persian soldiers were dead. Thousands more had fled in scattered groups, abandoning discipline, abandoning officers, abandoning the idea that order could be restored. And Khalid ibn al-Walid did not chase them blindly. That restraint mattered, because this victory was never about killing every man on the field. It was about sending a message that could not be misunderstood. Word of what happened at Walaja traveled faster than any cavalry. Survivors reached Persian garrisons in Iraq with fragmented stories, units swallowed from behind, cavalry appearing where there had been nothing, formations collapsing without warning. They all described the same thing. We were winning, and then everything broke at once. This is where the psychological damage began. Persian commanders had been trained to believe in linear warfare. Advance, pressure, break the enemy. Victory followed structure. Walaja shattered that belief because the Persians had done everything correctly. They had the numbers, they had the terrain, they had the momentum, and it still ended in catastrophe. Here's what most people miss. Khalid's victory did not rely on surprise alone. It relied on predictability. He knew exactly how the Persians would fight, because their doctrine allowed no alternatives. They would push the center, they would overcommit, they would stretch their line. They would believe discipline could compensate for exposure. Khalid turned those assumptions into weapons, and once Persian commanders realized this, the war changed. But not in Persia's favor. Within weeks, new Persian forces were assembled. New commanders were appointed. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. They no longer trusted the battlefield. Every open plain felt dangerous. Every retreat felt suspicious. Every pause felt like a trap forming. Khalid had poisoned certainty itself. The next engagements proved it. Persian units hesitated where they once advanced confidently. Cavalry held back when momentum was needed. Infantry commanders waited for perfect alignment that never came. They had learned the wrong lesson. Instead of adapting, they became cautious. And Khalid exploited that too, because his strategy at Walaja was not a single trick. It was a principle. Control space, control timing, force the enemy to commit first, punish commitment with movement. This pattern repeated again and again. At Ulay, along the Euphrates, across the plains of Iraq, Persian armies still outnumbered Khalid's forces. They still had armor, training, and experience. What they no longer had was confidence. And confidence is what holds formations together when plans fail. There is a moment in every battle when doctrine runs out and instinct takes over. At Walaja, Khalid reached that moment first. The Persians never recovered. Reports reaching Ctesiphon grew darker by the week. Governors demanded reinforcements. Officers blamed terrain, scouts, even fate. But none could explain how armies kept being drawn forward, stretched thin, and broken apart from angles that should not have existed. The imperial court began to understand something terrifying. They were not fighting a force that reacted to them. They were fighting a commander who dictated their behavior. Khalid was no longer responding to Persian moves. He was programming them. And this is where the deeper impact of Walaja becomes clear. The battle did not just open Iraq, it exposed the fragility of imperial warfare when faced with mobile, adaptive command. Persian armies had been designed to fight other empires, forces that respected the same rules. Khalid did not respect those rules. He studied them. Then he violated them with precision. The genius of Walaja was not the encirclement itself. Encirclements were known. What made it devastating was timing. Khalid waited until retreat was psychologically impossible. By the time the Persians realized they were surrounded, turning back felt like admitting failure. So they hesitated. And hesitation is fatal. The survivors of Walaja carried that hesitation with them into every future engagement. When Arab forces withdrew, Persian commanders wondered if it was a trap. When Arab cavalry disappeared, they assumed an ambush. Every decision became slower. Every formation became cautious. And against Khalid, caution was weakness, because he understood the final truth of war. Victory does not belong to the stronger army. It belongs to the commander who decides when the enemy commits, and when they cannot escape that decision. Walaja was proof. The Persian Empire still existed after the battle, but its military soul had been wounded. It no longer believed itself untouchable. And once that belief is gone, collapse becomes a matter of time. Khalid ibn al-Walid did not destroy Persia in a day, but on that plain, he proved it could be destroyed, and the empire never stopped bleeding from that realization. The final reckoning was still ahead. The Persian Empire did not collapse immediately. Empires rarely do. What happened after Walaja was slower, quieter, and far more dangerous. Because the defeat did not just remove soldiers from the field, it removed certainty from the command structure. Persian generals still had men. They still had armor. They still had supply lines. What they no longer had was faith in the battlefield itself. Every engagement after Walaja carried an invisible weight. Commanders remembered how a controlled advance had turned into entrapment, how discipline had failed when movement was stolen, how a victory that felt guaranteed had vanished in minutes. And Khalid ibn al-Walid understood this perfectly. He did not rush to exploit chaos. He let fear mature. Persian forces began to fight shadows. They hesitated before advancing. They checked flanks that appeared empty. They delayed decisions, waiting for clarity that never came. This hesitation fractured imperial coordination. When armies hesitate, orders arrive late. When orders arrive late, formations lose shape. When formations lose shape, numbers stop mattering. Khalid pressed exactly where hesitation existed. He maneuvered aggressively, appearing in places Persian commanders did not expect. He withdrew deliberately, tempting pursuit. He advanced suddenly, forcing rushed decisions. Every move echoed Walaja. Every choice reminded Persian officers of the moment everything broke. This is where the myth truly died. Persian military doctrine had been built on a single assumption, that control came from strength and structure. Walaja proved control came from timing, and timing belonged to Khalid. As Arab forces continued their advance through Iraq, Persian resistance became fragmented. Garrisons surrendered without battle. Field armies avoided direct engagement unless terrain felt absolutely secure. Even then, they advanced cautiously, too cautiously. That caution became paralysis. The empire was no longer setting the terms of war, it was reacting. Here's what most people miss. Khalid's genius was not the encirclement itself. It was the patience to wait until escape felt unthinkable. At Walaja, the Persians could have withdrawn early. They did not, because victory felt too close. They could have paused and consolidated. They did not, because doctrine demanded pressure. By the time retreat became necessary, retreat felt like disgrace. So they stayed. And staying killed them. This lesson spread through every Persian camp. Commanders feared being the next to overcommit. Officers feared advancing too far. Cavalry feared separating from infantry. The army that once moved like a machine now moved like a crowd, and crowds break. The final Persian attempts to stabilize the front came too late. Each new army arrived already burdened by stories of Walaja. Soldiers whispered about cavalry appearing from nowhere, about lines closing like doors. Fear does not need to be accurate. It only needs to be believed. By the time Persian leadership recognized the scale of the crisis, Khalid's strategy had already reshaped the war. He had demonstrated that imperial armies could be controlled, not by force, but by manipulation. That realization was fatal, because once an empire understands it can be outthought, it loses its greatest weapon: inevitability. The war continued. Battles followed, armies clashed, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Persia could still resist, it could no longer dominate, and it would never again fight with the confidence it once had. This is the true legacy of Walaja. Not the bodies on the field, not the banners taken, but the moment an empire realized its rules no longer guaranteed survival. The moment certainty died. When you look back at that sun-scorched plain near the Euphrates, the numbers seem impossible. 30,000 Persians, 15,000 Arabs. Yet the outcome was inevitable, not because of chance, but because of design. Khalid ibn al-Walid did not defeat Persia by matching its strength. He defeated it by forcing it to move. Step forward, commit, stretch, believe. And then, when escape felt impossible, he closed the door. That single strategy echoed through every battle that followed. It turned imperial confidence into hesitation. It turned doctrine into a liability. And it marked the beginning of the end for one of the most powerful empires the ancient world had ever known. This was not luck. This was not chaos. This was control. And once control was lost, Persia never recovered.